Hi, I'm Dick Rauscher, writer of the Stony newsletter. Today we're going to be talking about boundaries and establishing a healthy sense of self so that we can live a happy life. Boundaries define who we are relative to the rest of the world. Okay? It defines who we are and what's important to us, how we want to live our lives, how we want other people to treat us. And if we don't understand our boundaries, then people don't know who we are because we don't know who we are. If you flip that concept, then when we establish healthy boundaries to define who we are, then it gives us the ability to honor and respect the boundaries in others. If you want to be happy, if you want to live a happy life and be in a healthy, happy relationship with other people, then you have to learn both how to establish your own boundaries and then how to honor them in others. Because that is the foundation of a healthy relationship. A boundary always, and this is important, it always allows for a relationship. It is almost always non-reactive. A healthy boundary doesn't have to be established with anger or aggression. It just has to be stated. Boundaries are never finished. In other words, we're always growing, and life introduces new experiences that teach us that we really do have to establish boundaries and where those boundaries are. So if you think about a boundary as being a circle around us that protects us and defines who we are, then picture that boundary as being maybe jagged and kind of close to us in some places, and maybe it's a little different and a little further away in others. Some cases it's thin, some cases it's thick. We're always working on it. Boundaries are a work in progress. And the healthier we get, the more clear they become, obviously. Another important insight that comes with a boundary is the idea that a boundary always requires a consequence. In other words, if you say, I'm not going to allow anyone to speak to me in that tone of voice again, and I don't want you to do that. I mean, that's what a lot of us do. But that's empty. All that is spouting off. It becomes a boundary when we say very quietly, I really don't like people talking to me the way you're talking to me. And the boundary that I need to establish is if that continues, then I probably am not going to be around you a lot. Once you establish the consequence, then the boundary becomes real. Boundaries can be gentle or they can be firm. For example, a gentle boundary might be, and this is part of negotiating any relationship, you have to have the boundaries and the consequences. For example, if you get up after 6:30 in the morning, the consequence, you'll have to make your own breakfast. I only make breakfast up till 6:30. After that, I'm getting ready to go to work or whatever. Or an aggressive boundary might say, if you continue to be verbally abusive, then our relationship may have to come to an end. Or it will come to an end if the abuse is bad enough. Now, establishing boundaries is a right. It's a right that every human being has. In fact, as I hope you're picking up in this conversation, is that it's more than a right. It's actually a necessity if we want to define who we are. But it is a basic right, and it's also important to recognize that abusive people, or people who want to be controlling, don't like boundaries. It'll make them angry. But that doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means that perhaps you're working or trying to establish some relationship with a person who tends to be too controlling or doesn't like boundaries. It does not mean you're aggressive. It does not mean you're being hurtful or being controlling yourself. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means you're being clear about who you are. A good way to think about this, a metaphor that I kind of like, is to think about, just take any inanimate object, like a chair. You can do anything you want to a chair. You can abuse it, you can paint, you can stand on it while you're painting the ceiling and drip paint all over it. You can take it outside and leave it out in the weather. You can do whatever you want. It's just an object. It has no ability to take care of itself or set boundaries. Okay? Only human beings can do that. Okay, so in other words, what I'm getting at is if we're working with an abusive person or in an abusive relationship, what the other person is trying to do, unknowingly, I mean, they may not even be aware that they're doing it, but this is what they are doing, is they're treating us as objects. They want to convert the world into objects. They don't see persons. They see an object to be manipulated or controlled. Only you and I can set a boundary that says, no, we're not an object, we're a human being, and we want to be treated like a human being, and here are the boundaries that I'm setting up if you're going to relate with me. Now, everybody has different boundaries. There's no such thing as a right or wrong boundary. It's just a boundary. It's what do you want in your life and what don't you want in your life. What are you willing to accept and what are you not willing to accept? If you can get clarity on that, it'll help a lot in building relationships with other people, and it'll make you a lot happier because you'll be living the life you want to live. It's important to recognize that if we were raised in families that required obedience or discouraged us from looking at ourselves or our own needs, in other words, they told us that if you pay too much attention to your own needs, you're being selfish. If you don't think about other people, you're being selfish. Boundaries and a healthy sense of self requires a healthy self-focus. You have to be clear as to who you are. Boundaries are hard. Let's face it, it's developing a sense of self. So sometimes establishing boundaries can be a pretty confusing work. Only thing that means is that it's a new learning for most of us. Most of us have to learn how to establish a sense of self and what our boundaries are going to look like. So don't get discouraged. It can be confusing work. It just means you're learning a new skill, and an important skill, if you want to be happy. That shift from an external focus, an obedient focus that focuses on other people's needs is very different from an internal loyalty to yourself. And that's the shift that you're making when you learn to establish healthy boundaries. Okay? So don't get discouraged. It's a process. If you find that you're getting overwhelmed, or if you're in an environment or in a relationship where things are not going well when you try to establish boundaries, get some help. Talk to a clergy person. Talk to a therapist. Talk to a friend. Friends can be very useful in helping us be clear about who we are and establishing boundaries. And by the way, a friend will always encourage us to establish those boundaries. So, again, good luck. Have fun doing it. It's an important part of establishing happiness. It's a very important part of our sacred journey as we begin to develop who we are, who our sense of self is. If today's video has been helpful and useful for you, and I hope it has, if you would like to sign up for the Stony Hill newsletter, you can click the link up on the upper right of your screen and put your email address, and I will add your name to the automatic emailing, and you'll get the newsletter each time it's released.